Good evening. There is a specific kind of quiet that descends upon an authoritarian regime just before the floor falls out. It is not the quiet of peace, and it is certainly not the quiet of stability. It is the atmospheric pressure of a vacuum. The sound of a leadership that has spent 2 decades building a fortress of perceived invincibility only to realize that the walls are made of paper and the wind is picking up. Tonight, we are facing a disconnect. On one side, a podium in Moscow where the statistics are gleaming, the posture is upright, and the narrative is one of inevitable victory. On the other side, a reality buried deep in the mud of the Donbass, where the gains are measured in inches, the costs are measured in hundreds of thousands of lives, and the Great Russian Bear is now reduced to asking North Korea for laborers and outdated Soviet-era shells. The question tonight is not just whether the war is being lost. The deeper question is this: when the lie grows this much larger than the truth, who is actually left holding the keys to the kingdom? Look at this. Just look closely at the visual coming out of the Kremlin's year-end press performance. It is December 2025. We are now nearly 4 years into a so-called special operation that was originally promised to last 72 hours. And there he sits, Vladimir Putin, in a gilded hall, calmly telling a carefully selected audience that the Russian economy is thriving, boasting a 1% growth rate. He leans toward the microphone with the practiced calm of a man who believes he has successfully outlasted the West's attention span. But here is the reality of autocracy. A leader's performance only works as long as the audience agrees to ignore what is missing from their own cupboards. While the Kremlin pushes the idea of military Keynesianism, the belief that an economy can be powered indefinitely by building tanks and blowing them up, the ground-level data tells a story of systemic failure. To understand where things truly stand, you have to examine the numbers the Kremlin never places on the teleprompter. We are now tracking reports that the Russian central bank, for the first time since the war began, has started selling off its physical gold reserves. Think about that for a moment. You do not sell the family silver when the farm is thriving. You sell it when the creditors are already knocking and the harvest has turned to ash. The historical parallels here are not subtle. They are screaming. In 1904, Tsar Nicholas II embarked on what his advisors described as a short, victorious war against Japan. They believed a quick military triumph would calm domestic unrest and preserve the Romanov dynasty for another century. They fully believed their own propaganda about Russian exceptionalism. But the reality of the battlefield, logistical collapse, technological inferiority, and elite arrogance, shattered the myth. That short, victorious war did not save the Tsar. It became the catalyst for the 1905 revolution, the first fracture in the dam that would eventually wash the entire imperial system into history's dustbin. Fast forward to today, and we are witnessing a 2025 version of that same strategic blindness. The Kremlin now claims an unemployment rate of just 2%, the lowest in modern Russian history. On paper, that sounds like an economic miracle. But in the context of a prolonged war of attrition, it is not a success signal. It is a warning flare. It does not mean jobs are plentiful. It means workers are gone. It means the labor pool has been drained into trenches, military factories, or across borders by those fleeing mobilization. This is not full employment in the traditional sense. It is full employment of the graveyard. And then there is the human cost, a number so large it almost loses meaning until you slow down and actually think about it. Conservative estimates now place Russian casualties, killed or permanently maimed, at more than 790,000. That is not simply a military statistic. That is a demographic disaster. That is nearly 800,000 families receiving wooden memorials and compensation payments instead of sons, husbands, and fathers. But here is the critical shift that the Kremlin is desperately trying to hide. The fear is no longer focused only on the men who never return. It is increasingly focused on the ones who do. Leaked internal assessments from Russian security services show growing alarm over the return of nearly 700,000 veterans from the front lines. Why? Because these are not men returning with victory stories. These are men who were promised honor and delivered into a meat grinder. They have seen corruption at every level. They have watched incompetent commanders send units forward without support. They have learned, the hard way, that loyalty is rewarded with expendability. And now they are returning to a country where the so-called economic miracle means they still cannot afford bread. Historically, when an authoritarian leader loses the ability to provide either prosperity or victory, he leans harder on fear. But fear stops working when the men who carry the weapons no longer believe in the man giving the orders. This is where the arithmetic of power quietly begins to change. The image of a unified monolith starts to fracture, not from a dramatic external blow, but from internal decay. The structure weakens from the inside, beam by beam, as trust erodes and disbelief spreads. And as we move deeper into this analysis, the focus shifts from psychology to mechanics, from belief to reality on the ground. Because if part 1 was about the illusion inside the Kremlin, part 2 is about the physical collapse of the Russian military machine itself. For decades, Russian doctrine was built on a simple, brutal assumption: mass wins wars. Enough tanks, enough artillery, enough bodies thrown forward, and resistance eventually breaks. That logic may have worked in the 20th century. In 2025, it has slammed directly into a technological wall. Open-source intelligence platforms like Oryx paint a devastating picture. Verified losses now exceed 23,000 pieces of major Russian military equipment. This includes more than 4,000 main battle tanks, a number that surpasses the entire active tank inventory of most NATO nations combined. But the story is not just what is being lost. It is how it is being lost. The Ukrainian battlefield has become the most transparent combat environment in human history. Cheap drones now see everything. A column that assembles is detected within minutes. A buildup that once took hours to identify is now spotted by a device that costs less than a smartphone. Mass no longer creates breakthroughs, creates targets. As a result, Russian forces can no longer maneuver freely. Advances around places like Kupiansk and Pokrovsk are now measured in meters, not kilometers. Over the last several months, the average rate of advance has collapsed to roughly 1/10 of a kilometer per day. At that pace, reaching the next major objective would take years, assuming the forces survive that long. This is what strategic failure looks like in the modern era. Not a dramatic collapse, not a sudden retreat, but a slow, grinding self-destruction. And the most disturbing part of this slow-motion collapse is that it is not accidental. It is deliberate. It is a leadership choice. Russian forces continue launching offensives that commanders privately acknowledge cannot succeed. Villages with no strategic value are assaulted again and again at staggering human cost. 10,000 lives are traded for a few hundred meters of ruined ground. And the question becomes unavoidable. Why keep doing this? The answer lies in the nature of authoritarian power. In systems like this, loyalty matters more than competence. Truth is not rewarded, obedience is. If a Russian general speaks honestly and says the offensive is impossible, that the troops are exhausted, that the equipment is refurbished scrap pulled from storage yards built in the 1960s, he is not promoted. He is removed. He is investigated. He becomes the problem. We have seen this cycle play out repeatedly. Commanders are fired, quietly reassigned, then resurfaced, only to be blamed again when the next failure arrives. It is a game of musical chairs being played on a ship that is already taking on water. The Kremlin cannot admit that the system itself is broken. So instead, it insists that individuals are failing. The result is a military trapped in a permanent state of denial. But the rot does not stop at the battlefield. The Russian economy is now sliding into what analysts describe as a cannibal economy. To keep the war machine running, the state is consuming its own future. Funding is stripped from education, healthcare, and infrastructure, and funneled into defense plants that are not innovating, only refurbishing relics. Factories are reactivating old T-62 tanks. Assembly lines are not producing next-generation systems. They are scavenging parts. By 2025, this is no longer industrial mobilization. It is industrial recycling at the edge of collapse. The signs of desperation are everywhere. Russian weapon systems are increasingly dependent on foreign components smuggled through shadow networks. Microchips extracted from household appliances. Artillery shells sourced from North Korea. Drones assembled with parts purchased through third-party intermediaries. When a state that once claimed superpower status relies on Kim Jong-un to keep its guns firing, that is not strategic cooperation. That is terminal dependency. And then there is the shadow fleet, Russia's economic lifeline. For nearly 2 years, an armada of aging, uninsured oil tankers quietly moved Russian crude around sanctions, keeping cash flowing into the regime. It was the hidden artery sustaining the war. But that artery is now under threat. Ukraine has begun extending its strike campaign far beyond the front lines. Energy infrastructure, oil terminals, and tankers are being targeted not only in the Black Sea, but deep into areas once considered untouchable. The war the Kremlin believed could be contained to border regions is now reaching directly into the core of its revenue stream. If the shadow fleet is disrupted, the cannibal economy has nothing left to consume. And this brings us to the fundamental contrast at the heart of this conflict. In democratic systems, failure triggers correction. Elections, investigations, public debate, imperfect, messy but adaptive. In authoritarian systems, failure triggers escalation. Putin cannot admit error because his legitimacy is built on the myth of infallibility. To reverse course would be to confess weakness. So instead, the system doubles down, sacrifices more, and tightens control. The pressure is no longer only at the front. It is moving inward, toward the capital, toward the elite, toward the inner circle. Because when war stops producing victories and the economy stops producing growth, loyalty stops being automatic. It has to be enforced. We have now reached the endgame. Not a dramatic reveal of a hidden document or a leaked recording, but the slow realization of collapse itself. The Russian state, as it has existed under Vladimir Putin for the past quarter century, is no longer functioning as a coherent system. It is a hollow structure, held together by inertia, fear, and the absence of alternatives. The geopolitical humiliation is impossible to ignore. Reports indicate that Russia is now importing labor from North Korea and China simply to keep factories operational. This is the same Russia that once claimed parity with the United States and the European Union. Now, it survives by dependency. Sovereignty has been quietly traded for time. But the most serious threat to Putin is not external. It is internal. For years, the unspoken deal between the Kremlin and the elite was straightforward. Absolute loyalty in exchange for stability and wealth. That contract has collapsed. Stability is gone. Wealth is being liquidated to fund drones and artillery. And loyalty is being tested by the reality that the man at the top has led the system into a strategic dead end. A moral vacuum is forming at the center of power. When the ideology of a greater Russia fails and the economic rewards disappear, only raw force remains. And raw force becomes dangerously unstable when everyone around you is searching for an exit. This is often framed as democracy versus authoritarianism, a battle of values. But at its core, it is a battle of resilience. Democracies absorb failure because they are built on consent. Authoritarian systems appear solid until they suddenly fracture. They are rigid. They are brittle. By late 2025, the brittleness of the Putin system is no longer theoretical. The cracks are visible everywhere, in the central bank's asset sales, in military advances measured in meters, and in the state's growing fear of its own returning soldiers. This is not just a military setback. It is a structural failure of the strongman model of governance. A system that punishes truth eventually loses the ability to see reality at all. The human cost is overwhelming. Nearly 1 million lives damaged or destroyed in pursuit of an imperial illusion. A nation transformed into a fortress that increasingly resembles a prison. And here is the final contradiction. The Kremlin is no longer trying to win the war. It is trying to delay collapse, hoping for a miracle, hoping for a shift in Western politics, hoping the world grows tired. But the world has not grown bored, and neither have the Russian people. The families of the fallen, the workers inside a cannibalized economy, the veterans returning to a broken society, they are not disengaged. They are angry. Every move designed to protect the leader accelerates the destruction of the system beneath him. Inside the bureaucracy, loyalty purges replace competence. Technocrats are removed. Loyalists installed. The state becomes less manageable by design, because unpredictability is now seen as a greater threat than failure.
Surveillance expand.
Participation becomes mandatory. Propaganda turns coercive. When admiration must be enforced with prison sentences, authority has already evaporated. And beneath all of this lies the most dangerous development of all. Quiet shifts are occurring inside Russia's nuclear security apparatus. Elite units guarding tactical nuclear stockpiles are being reinforced, not because of NATO but because of fear from within. The regime is no longer fully confident it controls its own military. This is the terminal paradox of authoritarianism. The military exists to protect the ruler, until the ruler becomes its greatest liability. Victory parades shrink. Modern equipment is replaced with relics because the present cannot be displayed. The regime retreats into symbolism because reality is unusable. This was always a future bought on credit, spending tomorrow to relive yesterday. And now the bill has arrived. The interest is unbearable. The resources are gone. And the man who signed the agreement is isolated, guarded by people who are quietly calculating their own survival. So we return to where we began. That specific kind of quiet. Not peace, not stability, but the silence of a vacuum. Vladimir Putin set out to make Russia respected again. Instead, he made it feared and then irrelevant except as a case study in self-destruction. The verdict of history is forming. A leader who fears his own people, scavenges his own economy, and relies on the charity of dictators to fight a war of choice is not a strongman. He is an epilogue. The only question left for the rest of the world is this. When the monolith finally collapses under the weight of its own failures, will we be standing close enough to be pulled down with it? Or have we finally learned that the only way to deal with an autocrat is to stop believing in the illusion before he does? The clock is ticking, and in Moscow it is later than they think. Good night.